to the special session on World Population Day. The day ignites the awareness of the people towards the critical issues of population, the overcrowded planet, and the implications for it. In 1989, the Governing Council of the United Nations started observing this day when we turned 5 billion. The intent was that it would bring the attention of the world leaders towards the critical issues of population, and today it marks the 30th anniversary of this annual event. In 1989, we were 5 billion. Today, we are 7 billion. And by 2055, we will be 10 billion. Definitely, we cannot continue to grow like this. Today, we have with us our eminent guest, Dr. A.R. Nanda, former Secretary, Ministry of Health and Family Welfare, Government of India, former Registrar General, Census Commissioner of India. Sir, it is really an honor for us to have you here.
Thank you.
We also have with us Dr. Abhijit Das, Director, Center of Health and Social Justice, New Delhi. Dr. Das is a doctor with training in obstetrics, pediatrics and public health. He has more than 20 years of experience in grassroots work, training, research and policy advocacy. Welcome to you, sir, also. So, the recent estimates say that very soon we will be surpassing China in terms of population growth. Today we have 1.37 billion and China has 1.43 billion. And it is expected that by 2027 we will be the most populous country in the world. So, my first question to you, Dr. Das, see, when China has already officially ended its two-child norm, so why is it so that India still continues to grow?
Okay, actually both China and India are growing in that sense, because China's population is still growing at the rate of 0.6% per annum. India is growing at roughly 1% per annum. So both countries are growing. Yes, India is growing a little more rapidly, but both India and China are going to be stopping their growth in China around 2030, India 30 years later around 2060. What we have to understand is that population is a function of the number of people who are reproducing, not only the number of children. So what is happening in India today compared to what is happening in China today is that India has more reproducing couples or more people in the age group at which reproduction takes place, whereas in China the number of people who are in the reproductive age group has now sort of become less, because China had applied a one-child norm in 1970s. So what had happened is China rapidly reduced its population, and now those people are no longer reproducing. So China will get into a contraction phase, and we have to understand that contraction is another phenomenon which happens. Like, look at Japan. Japan, the population is actually coming down, and Japan has a serious problem of, one is its tax gathering, because the dependency ratio is getting on the other side, means the proportion of people who are productive is lower compared to the proportion of people who have retired, because Japan has an old population. So I think we have to understand population in a slightly more nuanced manner than just look at numbers. Yes, India's population will exceed that of China, but is that a matter of concern? What do you do? I think that is where we should be discussing. China has a big problem. It has a problem in low fertility. It has a problem with low sex ratio. Do we want to go that way is something that we need to consider.
But sir, then it means you want to say that we are going through a population explosion. There was a Paul Ehrlich book which said about population bomb and population explosion and terms like that, and very frequently India was used as a metaphor in that sense. So are these numbers very scary? Are we going through a population explosion kind of a thing?
Absolutely not. Actually, if you look at the numbers of children that are being born per couple, which is called the total fertility rate in India, it is coming down very rapidly. In India, the demographers had said that we need to achieve a total fertility rate of 2.1, which means that for every woman, 2.1 children are being born. That means you have replacement fertility. The point of what is called net reproductive rate of 1, or a place where which you replace your population, has been reached. But then the question is, why do we still see a growth in population. The growth in population is seen because we now have a much younger reproducing population. And this is something that we need to understand carefully, because what happens is earlier, let's say 20 years earlier, you had a high rate of growth, which means there were many more children. Now those children 20 years later are in the reproducing age group. So now you have many more reproducers in the population compared to the number of children. So this affects what is called the population pyramid. Earlier we had a pyramid which was a steep triangle, meaning the base was very wide and the base comprised of children who were infants, less than 1 year, 5 years, 5 to 10 years, and we had a very broad base. But that broad base is 1970s, 1960s. What has happened is, since then, the number of children born has become less. So India's population pyramid now does no longer represent a triangle. So what it has become, actually, slowly it has started to bulge in the middle. So if you look at population growth rate by age, the largest population growth in India takes place in the 25 to 65 age group or in the 65 plus age group. If you look at 0 to 5 age group, if you look at 5 to 15 age group, the population growth rate in India is actually coming down. So this population explosion is a misnomer. Thankfully, I had a chance to meet Mr. Ehrlich a couple of years ago, and I told Mr. Ehrlich that, you made this kind of enormous prediction in the late 1960s, and what it has happened is it has created a bogey of this population explosion. Because what you have done is, in India, there has been a complete population control mindset. The question is, populations will grow and contract. That is called the demographic curve. We go through different phases of the demographic transition. We control deaths first, because we were able to control a lot of the epidemics, and then slowly birth rates have also been controlled. If you look at all the families around us, we will mostly see two-child families. When we have smaller than two-child families, there is another problem, and we will talk about it later.
So that means you're talking about population momentum, and I think that can be changed by delaying the age of the marriage, or delaying the first birth, or spacing between the children. I think that would help. Quickly, sir, I come to you, Nanda sir. Very ambitiously, India started the National Family Planning Program in 1952, and it was meant to control the population. And there was also a shift in the nomenclature, where we said that Ministry of Health and Family Planning, it changed to Ministry of Health and Family Welfare. And don't you think so that today we need to shift our focus from the narrow concept of family planning, which has a euphemism of more of control than of stabilization? Because nowadays we talk more about population stabilization. What are your views on this?
1994, we had the International Conference on Population and Development. This was a paradigm shift in thinking on population issues. Earlier, every decade there was a population conference, but this was the first conference on population and development. So here, the issue of population was put in a perspective in which one has to look at the critical issues of women's empowerment, gender equity and equality, reproductive health and reproductive rights, instead of only contraceptive or family planning. So the concept has widened, because it was experienced not only in India but all over the world, that stand-alone family planning or contraceptive programs are very restrictive. Will not be able to deliver goods when it comes the demographic transition process. That's why to make it more effective, the family planning program or population program, the program was called as, instead of population control or standalone family planning program, it was called as population stabilization and people's well-being. In fact, population stabilization is a word which is not as authoritarian as population control. Population control means the government or policymakers or somebody in the community is controlling fertility, controlling families, whereas the other stabilization is a process, and that process has to be so smooth that it will be something called a balanced population stabilization, which means there will be balancing between the sex ratio at birth. You don't have adverse sex ratio at birth, which is adverse to girl child. So that type of problem. So gender equity, gender equality, women's empowerment, women will have their final decision, the reproductive rights, as to when, how, and at what intervals they will go for another child. But of course it will be informed decision, so information and services have to be given, the choices have to be offered by the service providers.
And yes, sir, to quote that, this year we are celebrating the 25th anniversary of the ICPD conference that
That's
was
right.
held at Cairo, and for the first time here the attention was given on the development aspect and population and development, and program of action was given where lot of emphasis on women equality, women health, maternal health and all these issues was given. And even health economists, they have said that the way the population is increasing, it has lot of bearing on the young and the old population particularly. Nanda sir, again coming back to you, what do you think, what are the social and economic linkages in the society with the growing population and with the changing distribution of population that we are having today?
Yes, as the demographic transition takes place, and Dr. Das has already made it clear, that population pyramid, you have what is happening in India by and large is the child population or the population in the age group of 0 to 5, 0 to 10, 0 to 15, that is coming down compared to the population in the working age group, adult working age group, which is, let us say, 17, 18 or 19 to 59 or 60. So there is a youth bulge of the youth, and the aging is increasing. Although the last census of 2011 has said that it is only 8.3, I am pretty sure by now it will be close to 10%. And in the projection is in another 30 years, this is going to be 25% of our population. So what will happen? The dependency ratio, the whole thing will change. You see, dependency ratio is now will be more and more dependency from the old age group. So when the working age group starts shrinking compared to the people in the old age group, then the dependency ratio, particularly from the old age, the aging, the elderly, will be much more. That is what is happening in many countries, in the Western countries, Japan and other places. So that's another crisis. But India has to be prepared for all these challenges right from now. There are areas like Kerala and some of the urban areas in Delhi and others which have to be thoroughly prepared for old age security and many other things, with nuclear family, the family structure getting changed. So all these are problems. And with the sex ratio at birth being adverse to girls, so that is another big problem of population stabilization, and that is what has to be tackled. How do you tackle this on preference? Which means you have to empower the women, you have to empower the girl child, you have to give them full education. The age at marriage will shift further, they will be employable, they will have the skills, and the skills, all that will help them to be considered as much of an asset as a son. A daughter will be as much of an asset as the son, and also property rights and other things, so that they will also be, in fact already this situation in the urban areas is happening. You will find the daughters are more taking care of the old parents than the sons. So these are issues, societal issues, which are going to come up, already come up, and are going to come up in future. So these are all problems of the process of population stabilization. So population control is completely anachronism. We should never talk of it. In fact, it is going to do more harm than good. Population control, authoritarian mindset, and that is where the coercive nature of sterilization, female sterilization, coercive nature of, all those things will happen.
We have one question coming from Dr. Rupini.
What are the consequences of graying of population in India especially? That is first question. And the second one is there any difference between the crude birth ratio as well as the crude death ratio?
You see, the last question I will take first. The crude birth rate and crude death rate are only a type of statistical presentation. It's called crude, but that's why you are taking total fertility rate, which is a better idea of giving fertility rate, and then of course the mortality at different age groups. Fertility, as I said, is that. So that's something only a presentation. The other aspect of the graying population, which is happening in Japan and Eastern Europe and in some of the other countries, is also going to stare at our face of India in next 20-30 years. It has already started. Look, if you see Kerala government have started doing something. I think every village, every community area, they are having some measures for this to tackle this issue. It's not easy. Social security is going to be different. You can't have just old age homes and leave them like that. There are limitations of that. So these are the issues which will come, the implications of graying population, and also how to utilize them. How to utilize them fruitfully of their experience, how to keep them in proper shape. That's why, there will be issues like, shifting the age of retirement in government and public services. Maybe it is going to be from 60 to 65. Already it has happened in academic and perhaps amongst the medical personnel. It is going to be 70 very soon. It will go on to 75, as it is happening in America and other countries. There is no age of retirement. So all these implications are there. Plus, you have to have other types of social security measures which will be there. And then in that context, the daughters have to be taken as assets. You see, they will be, even if they get married, doesn't matter, but they will have a responsibility for their paternal house, the parents. That can be there. There will be many implications of the graying population.
Very rightly said, Dr. Nanda. And Kerala, as you mentioned, the recent reports says that by 2060, 85% the life expectancy will be 85. And a lot of things are going on to build social security among the elderly, because elderly have only the children as their asset or the ownership or the property which they have earlier. It's really important issue to consider that as we grow, the elderly population also grows, and without social security, without proper measures, we are not able to fruitfully use that human resource.
If you look at the human rights sort of articulation, it belongs to each human being. So when we say people matter, I think what we have to understand, and I want to draw from the earlier discussion on the aging population, is that the people are a diverse group. There are people across age groups, people across genders, people across rural-urban divide, people across different social categories, and until and unless we understand that if, we mentioned SDG. SDG has one slogan. It has 17 goals, but one slogan. The one slogan is leaving no one behind. So when you have a slogan which is no one behind, then what it forces us is to look at what we call in technical terms disaggregated data. At this point in time, if you look at most of the data, yes, we do get disaggregation by sex, and we know that a lot of the social indicators, health indicators are so different across even the male-female. If you look at infant mortality rate, the male infant mortality rate is lower than the female infant mortality rate. So there is a disadvantage. Similarly, if you look at rural urban, there is a social disadvantage in rural and urban. So what is happening today is that we need to understand the needs of different population groups, and this is different population groups. In India we can look at the SCST groups, and you see that the indicators for different groups are different. Some groups are pretty high and have reached, we mentioned Kerala, even geographic and diversity is one. Kerala population or Kerala indicators are more like Europe. So what we have to do is, we cannot have a single equation to solve the problem of the country. We have to understand the needs of each population group. What are the population dynamics happening in India? Number one, there is a huge move from rural to urban. The rural places, there are less facilities, poor people are moving to urban facilities. In urban spaces, we do not have adequate healthcare facilities, adequate childcare facilities. So our urban infrastructure is not meant for the poor. They are all moving into, let us say, informal settlements. So the way in which services today are being delivered, and I will mention public services are more important for the poor. So the way in which services are being delivered need to be recalibrated with the changes that are happening in the overall mechanism in which people exist in their lives. Rural population, let me say some words. I've worked mostly in rural population. We often do not understand the diversities which are there. Let us say a cultural diversity, let us say of a Kerala vis-a-vis a Rajasthan. We cannot use the same solution which worked in a particular place at a particular point in time and take it over to another place. You mentioned the issue of contraception. Contraception is not a problem. In India, anyway, we have reached the total fertility rate of 2.1. Contraceptive prevalence is pretty high. The problem today is that most of our contraceptive mindset is after 2 children are born. But the largest number of reproduction happens the first child and the second child. So if we want to actually reduce population growth rate, the momentum effect, as you had mentioned, we need to space children, and spacing is only possible if we use methods which are temporary. If we talk to couples who haven't had their first child, who haven't had their second child, and the most important, we also have to get men into the conversation. If we do not look at these new population groups as users of contraceptive services, we will miss the bus, because we are talking about those women who have had their second children. Most people are not going to have more than 2 children. So they are using the contraceptive after their fertility preference has been completed. We cannot slow population that way. So I think the imagination of how to deal with these issues of social development, issues of contraceptive delivery, issues of healthcare service delivery, how they can serve the needs of the people who need it most, I think that's where public policy needs to recalibrate the way service delivery takes place. Then SDGs will be met. Yes, it is going to be difficult because India starts from a low, let us say, base. But the thing is, if we continue to deliver services in the way that we have done in the last 20 years, it will not be fit for purpose for the next 20 years, because the dynamics have changed and we need to understand and address the changing dynamics.
So do you mean to say that if we restrict people from the public services what we are giving, or we are disqualifying from the village councils or other things, such type of punishment kind of thing, if we bring it into account, will it help? The penalties if we put?
Absolutely
because this is
not.
actually what
yes,
has
that
been
is,
practiced most of the
That
times.
is something that, and Mr. Nanda has been at the forefront of that kind of public policy against it. And just to give an example, some of our benefits, including the ability to participate in panchayat elections in some states, are restricted after 2 children. What happens because of that? It has a differential impact on, the first thing is men and women. We have seen in studies done in the various states in which such a norm exists, is that a man, if he has a leadership aspiration, the third child often is either disowned, hidden, aborted. But if it is the family wants the third child, the woman's leadership aspiration is aborted. So it's a very clear choice. The man continues in his leadership aspiration and the woman gets controlled. So the childbirth is averted. When it's the woman, the childbirth happens because the family wants it and the woman's leadership is aborted. So that's one thing that happens. The second thing that happens is poorer people have more children. We have to understand that poorer people have more children for multiple reasons. Number one is for poorer people, many hands make light work because you have more resources. The second thing is they're the furthest from services. Their infant mortality rates are higher. They have more anxieties about social security at old age. So without adequate public support for the poor, they sometimes go in for additional children, or sometimes they have additional children because of situations beyond their control. I think it's much more important for them to receive those services across the world. And this was also something that India had made a slogan in 1974. Development is the best contraceptive. My grandmothers, I have two grandmothers, both had 2 pregnancies. I was not able to ask them what was the reason behind that because their pregnancies were taking place in 1920s. But one thing I know, both were masters. Both of them were MA. As women become more educated, women start taking control of their own reproductive lives. And I think if we talk about restricting lives, restricting birth through penalties and not through empowerment, I think we'll go the wrong way. Look at what happened in China. In China, they put in a 2-child norm, put in a 1-child norm. Immediately, their sex ratio fell. Today, they have a huge problem of missing girls. What does missing girls do? Missing girls means there is increased violence against women. I have started, earlier they were taking sort of trafficking women from the Far Eastern states. Now they're also taking women from Pakistan because there aren't women to marry. We have the same situation in Haryana. We are getting the same situation in Rajasthan. So we have to be concerned. What kind of a society are we looking for in the future? Penalties are no way. Empowerment is the only way.
I would like to thank both the experts, and we deliberated on the issues of population. Thank you.